guess technically that's kidnapping. I have no idea. Tasha, do you remember where the volleyball game is at?
No, I don't. No.
Okay. I don't know. Right now, they filter in a lot, but again, with the volleyball game going on, it's hard to say how many will be there. So we'll see what happens, and good luck over there.
Yeah, I'll need it.
All right. Well, let's open our Bibles to Daniel chapter 2. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Lord God and the King, you raise up and you tear down kingdoms and empires as you have done from the foundation of the world. We ask that you would bless our country and our leaders, guide them in the ways that lead to peace in accordance with your holy will, that our kingdom may last for a good time, and that we may be blessed as citizens of it. But in all things, help us to always remember that our hope does not lie on the weak and failing strength of kings or presidents, but on yours as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. In your name we pray. Amen. All righty, so we were working through Daniel chapter 2 last week, and we'll probably finish it up this week if we happen to finish it early, which I doubt. We'll just kind of call it there, I guess, because I honestly didn't expect to make it, so I haven't actually prepared sufficiently for very far into chapter 3, although everybody knows chapter 3. That's the fiery furnace. So, but that being said, you might remember, just as a recap, well, what was going on when we last left Daniel? Someone tell me what the story was thus far.
Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and he wanted these magicians and all to tell him what the dream was, and nobody could do that. And he got mad.
Yeah, very mad. How mad did he get? We're going to kill them all. Okay, and then that includes poor Daniel and his friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel manages to persuade the king to give them time to go and do it, again by doing something very different than the so-called wise men of Babylon did. The wise men of Babylon throw up their hands and say, this is impossible. Daniel, and apparently lose all faith in their hearts being able to do anything, and their gods. Whereas Daniel has enough confidence in his God that he just goes to Nebuchadnezzar and says, set a time, and then we'll tell you the interpretation. And so all of the wise men benefit from this. He goes, and I believe we left with around verse 17. No, we finished, and Daniel goes back to his friends, urges them to pray. God gives them the answer to the dream. Daniel and his friends praise the God of heaven, and then we come to verse 24 when Daniel goes and points out the meaning of the dream. And by the way, we haven't heard what the dream is yet. We're about to hear it as Daniel tells him what the dream is. But I will also start by saying what the dream represents is kind of a pivotal moment in Daniel. And I don't just say it because it just seems like it's big because it takes up a chapter. It also takes up 2 later chapters because God then gives Daniel 2 separate visions about more or less the same thing. So he gives one very early to Nebuchadnezzar and has Daniel interpret it for him. And then he gives Daniel more information, so to speak. This is kind of a general dream about what is going to happen with the nation of Israel prior to the coming of the Messiah. And this is what the dream is at its root, overarching point. Just to be clear before we start it is a prophecy about what God is going to do with the nation of Israel on the one hand, and the entire known world up until the coming of the Messiah. And the subsequent 2 visions, which are a lot weirder in Daniel 7 and 8, are about the same thing, but with a lot more detail. And they're to Daniel, which says, Daniel's only, I believe, like 11 chapters long. The fact that 3 chapters get taken up with this show that this is pivotal for the whole point of Daniel. And I'll give you one more spoiler before we dive into the dream. This is because this is going to be the way that God helps give his people of Israel a sense of how to look about all of the things they are going to be facing for the next several hundred years, so that they can keep faithful and not do what, say, Israel did in the wilderness and ask, well, is God with us or not with all this stuff happening? They'll know, they should know, God told us this would happen. God told us this would happen. God told us this was happen. And so we could, in theory, be confident knowing that the end vision will also happen. All right, does that make sense? So this is a vision that gives Israel the hope necessary to endure a lot of unpleasant things coming up.
And that's why visions, in plans of people who are going through that will know.
Yes.
I never thought about that.
Yeah, and it's not so that they'll know, and they don't mean it this way, it doesn't sound like. It's not so they'll know in the sense of, I'll be able to figure out when all of these things were happening. Timekeeping per se is not the point. The point is, and this is a very good thing for understanding Revelation, is the same. It's to say, it's to prepare people on the one hand for all of the great upheavals and difficulties that will happen. For instance, I hear people say a lot these days, what's the world coming to? I don't know how we're going to get through this. Things are going to hell in a handbasket, stuff like that. And true, to a certain degree, things are kind of chaotic. They are deteriorating. But the book of Revelation, on the one hand, says, and you should expect that, because God already showed you this is going to happen. And it's going to get a lot worse, folks. It's going to get a lot worse. But this is a reason to be hopeful. Not because, oh, we're so glad things are going bad, but because we know each of these things are supposed to happen by God's design in order to give way to the final hope. So Revelation, like Daniel, is meant to help us be able to endure under all of these things and not say, well, why is God allowing this to happen? Isn't he here with us? But rather to say, this is what God said he would allow to happen. And now we can look forward, even reading the bad as a sign, God is faithful. Because he said this would happen. So we know what's going to happen at the end. Make sense? All right, well then let's dive into the dream. Chapter 24, we'll just go up first of all to 28. This is the introduction before the dream.
Then Daniel went to Ararat, whom the king had appointed to execute the wise men of Babylon, and said to them, do not execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king, and I will interpret his dream for him. Ararat took Daniel to the king at once, and said, I have found a man among the exiles from Judah, who can tell the king what his dream means. The king asked Daniel, also called Belshazzar, are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpreted? Daniel replied, no wise man, enchanter, musician, or imitator can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come. Your dream and the visions that pass through your mind as you lay on your bed are these.
Okay. Now, we'll kind of not say too much about verses 24 through 26, just because those are pretty straightforward. Daniel asked the captain of the guard, don't kill us. We can do this. Okay, well, go report it to the king. Straightforward. Now, I only point out what Daniel says in 27 to 28. If you'll remember, it's almost exactly the same thing that the wise men said in verses 10 and 11. Because what do they say? There is not a man on earth who can do what the king asks. No king. And then in 11, what the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods. They do not live among men. Daniel replies almost verbatim, which is interesting because he wasn't even there. It's as though God is trying to move Daniel to speak in this way to show by similarity just how different the two are. So he says, No one can do this for you, king. Now, if I were Nebuchadnezzar and I was sitting on my throne and I just heard this from the wise men a few days ago, my blood would start to be boiling, I would imagine. But then Daniel doesn't stop. He says, instead, only the gods can do it, but they're not here. He says, there is a God in heaven who can do this, and he does. A very different kind of God being revealed here. But this is a God who is living and active among men and in his world down through the ages. And by the way, it is worth saying something about most of the ancient religions back in those days. All of them, of course, believed that there were gods. There were forces that were very powerful. We got some piano serenading going on. That's always good. I'll start chanting at the right tones. But to them, there's the material world and the world of the gods. And these are two very, very, very different worlds. The gods can interfere with the world as they see fit, but by and large, the gods are just kind of doing their own thing. And they are utterly apathetic towards what goes on here below, except when they want to use what goes on here below as power plays, so to speak, on what goes on up above, and in order to garner some kind of activities up there. By and large, what happens up there does affect everything down here. So why do your crops grow? Well, to put it crassly, because the gods upstairs in heaven are breeding, and that's what causes the earth to grow. And so you do things down below to try to move the gods to breed, so that they'll make the rains will fall and things like that. That's why, sadly, not to get too graphic, that's why certain kinds of parties were very, very popular around springtime in order to, by human breeding, move the gods to also breed so that the rains would shower upon the earth and water and the crops would grow.
So you're talking other gods.
Yes, this is not Israelite God. I'm talking about how most ancient religions thought about the relationship between gods and the earth.
But their gods weren't real.
No, they weren't.
But they thought they were.
They thought they were real, and they thought that this is how the order stood.
Oh.
That the gods up there were doing their own thing, and at most they would interfere down here to get advantages over each other up there, or down here might move them to do something up there. But they did believe that this world depended on what they were doing up there. Notice, so the gods are detached, but affected by what we do here. Whereas in this view, God is never detached in any real sense. He's utterly transcendent, yes. And by the way, he is not moved in the same way. He cannot be manipulated in the way that the gods of the ancient religions can be by what humans do here below. We talked about that last time. That's what magic was. You manipulate the gods by doing things down here. God cannot be manipulated. He does what he is going to do, but he is attentive. He is involved. He is living and active. He is utterly concerned with what goes on in here, and always has his thumb in the world. So it's just a very, very different conception. The Israelite religion is just so radically different than all of the surrounding religions in which it was affected, just in its basic conception of how reality worked and how God was in relationship to the world. Just as a quick understanding, so that when you hear some of these things, you realize Israelites are a standing challenge to ancient religion at its basic premises. All right, so anyway, let's move on with the dream. Verses 29, we'll just read the dream in one big go. 29 through 35.
As you were lying there, O king, your mind was and the revealed mystery showed you what is going to happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than other living men, but so that you, O king, may know the interpretation and that you may understand what went through your mind. You looked, O king, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were broken to pieces at the same time and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace, but the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole.
All right. So, weird dream, right? How many of you, if you ever dreamt about a statue being swept out, would be troubled? Oh, this must be some kind of deep meaning. Like I said, I have crazy dreams all the time. The reason I think that, and I say I think, that Nebuchadnezzar was troubled by this is that the spirit was troubled, the spirit of God, that is to say, was troubling him. Even though he doesn't recognize a Holy Spirit, that's what's happening. The Holy Spirit is troubling him with the sense that this dream is meaningful and it's important for him to understand. Now, we're not going to dive into the meaning of all of these now because that's what Daniel's going to do in the next few verses. And we'll let Daniel do the interpreting, and then we'll explain more about what Daniel is saying. But before we do, I just want to point out, notice how humble Daniel is here. What does he say when he's about to interpret this? I can do this, but why? Because I am better than wise men. I'm just amazing. You invested well when you took us Jews out from Israel and you put us into training. And by the way, you should really let us finish that training and make us your best because we are the best. That is attitude. What does he say?
He specifically says that it's not his wisdom, but it's God. So that
God is the one who gives him this wisdom. That, in fact, it's God who reveals the mystery. It's a mystery he could not determine by himself, but God gives. By the way, notice what Daniel is also doing here. He is giving a testimony, you might say he's evangelizing in a certain kind of sense to the king. He's laying this out from the beginning. King of Babylon, you have been consulting all of these gods, all of these magicians. I'm here to tell you about the true God, the one who made heaven and earth and who holds all things in his hands. And that's what God has sent me here to do. And he doesn't do it in some really bullheaded confrontational way. He does it by speaking the truth of what he believes and what is just the truth. I am nothing. God is revealing something to you. Let me tell you about how God has moved me to speak. There's something to say about when we are doing our own evangelizing. We should have a Bible study on how to witness our faith to others at some point in the future. But there's something to be said about this. The most effective way to evangelize, or rather, you cannot do any evangelism in any other effective way than by honestly witnessing to the truth. Daniel could have said, look at how amazing our people are, the Jews, and how wise we will be able to do things. So you should also honor our God. He says, I'm not even going to say anything about my people. I'm just going to say, this is God. This is what they do. And it's amazing. All right, that being said, let's dive into the nitty, or I should say, anyone have any questions at this point? Because we're about to get into the dense stuff.
I'm confused about the evangelizing comment you made just now.
Okay. How so?
You said that it is to, or that the best way is to witness, but not to witness about others or about yourself.
Sorry. Well, I'll say it again because I know I have a bad habit of starting a thought and then thinking I have a better way to do it and stopping abruptly and moving to that. So what I mean is the best way to witness is always to witness to the truth in a truthful way. You don't have to resort to gimmicks, to tricks, to try to point out other things about yourself or people. You can just say, it should always be oriented around, this is who God is. This is what he's done. This is what he's doing. Now, it's not to say that's all you do when you're evangelizing. It's to say that's the core of it. That's what the prophets do. That's what Daniel does. That is what the apostles do later as they go out and evangelize. And that's kind of Paul's key point. I don't put myself forward. I'm happy to become anything to all people and to make myself nothing in order to magnify the truth about what God says and does. If we are doing evangelism by fudging on the truth, well, we're not doing it well. Put it that way. Okay, does that clear it up?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's dive in. Let me look really quick how I want to try to break this up. I think we'll break it up by the pieces of the statue rather than read it in all one big go. Actually, no, let me do this. I'll read it all in one big go, and then we'll have you guys read it in sections, and we'll break it down that way. That way we'll get the total picture, and then we can piece it apart. After you, this was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. You, O king, are the King of kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds of the air. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold. After you, another kingdom will arise, inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain, but not by human hands. A rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, the interpretation is trustworthy. All right, so there's the big picture. Let's read this down in sections. Somebody want to read verse 36 to 38?
You, O King, are the King of kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed mankind. He set you over the birds of the air. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them. You are the head of gold.
All right. So the first place is pretty straightforward. That is the head of gold. So there, we have the statue, just as a quick reminder, composed of four main parts. There's a head made out of gold, a chest and arms made out of silver, which, by the way, is worth less than gold, but still a precious metal. Then the belly and loins are bronze, again, a worthwhile metal, but certainly less than silver. And then under that, the legs are made of iron, which is strong, stronger than all the rest. And each of these metals represents different kingdoms. I'll just quickly say the feet that are mixed with clay and iron are still part of the iron kingdom. It's not to say, it does not say another kingdom will arise that's partly. It includes them as though they are the same. It's just as time passes, things change in the kingdom. All right, so there's the head, the first one, the most glorious is what? Yeah. Nebuchadnezzar as king of Babylon. By the way, notice Daniel is very politically savvy here. He is not shy about heaping praise on Nebuchadnezzar. You are glorious King of Kings and all of this stuff. By the way, notice those are lowercase k, King of Kings. There's only one King of Kings. What he's saying is that to say, you are more exalted than all the kings of the earth right now. You are the most powerful king on earth at present. It is true. And who made him that, by the way? God of heaven has made you this. He has given you dominion, power, might, and glory. And by the way, you might already notice, you probably heard the expression, the king's word is law, right? Whatever the king wants, the king gets. That's actually almost never true in most kingdoms. Because almost every kingdom, they have to follow, the kings themselves have to follow certain rules. They have to placate groups of nobles. They have to do all these other things in their own kingdom. In Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon, his word was law. He could kill the wise men with a word. He could do whatever the heck he wanted. He was truly an absolute ruler in his kingdom. So that, in this sense, his authority is greater than almost every other kingdom that has ever transpired on the earth. Even the Emperor of Rome could not do that. I thought somebody, did you say something, Tasha?
No, you're probably hearing the kids.
Okay. All right. Straightforward enough. Now, after you, you, King of Babylon, another is, let somebody want to read 39, just verse 39. There's not a lot said about
After you,
these.
another kingdom will rise inferior to yours. Next, the third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule the whole earth.
It's interesting that very little gets said about these two. It says, there's going to be two more kingdoms. One is silver that's inferior to yours. Another will be bronze, which is inferior to them. Now, I'm going to say right now that there are two main streams of interpretation on this. The traditional one, which is the one I'm going to be spending the most time on, and a slightly newer, updated one that largely relies on the idea of, again, Daniel couldn't have been written by Daniel at the time that Daniel claims to be writing, because you can't predict the future. This probably happened at the time that after the exile and after all the events described, but it had to be before the Romans took power, and therefore it cannot include Rome in the interpretation. So that I'll briefly go over the second interpretation later. For now, I'm going to stick with the tradition, just so you're clear. All right. In the traditional, the silver is understood to be the Median Persian Empire. In just a few generations, in just a few more kings, Babylon will utterly be calling to Cyrus the Great, king of Persia. Persia will arise, they will eliminate, or they will conquer, rather, the kingdom of Babylon. And Cyrus will actually have a very, very large, very, very strong empire, one of the largest in geographic terms ever seen to Earth at that point. However, Cyrus will not have absolute power. As we'll see, Cyrus and his successor Darius, if they make a decree in a certain time, they're not allowed to change their minds. They're just not allowed to. Obviously, Nebuchadnezzar is allowed to change his mind whenever the heck he wants. In this sense, so you might say, the Silver Kingdom, though geographically larger, the dignity and the honor of the king is diminished. It is inferior to Babylon. So the head, Babylon, the silver is the Medeo-Persian Empire, under which, by the way, although it doesn't say it here, under which Israel will be allowed to return home. As soon as Cyrus becomes king, almost as soon as he becomes king, he allows the Israelites to return home. That's 70 years after the exile. So Babylon only lasts around 70 years before it falls. Interestingly, it's as though the Empire of Babylon was raised up by God specifically for the purpose of exiling the Jews and wiped from history as soon as that purpose was accomplished. Because that's about the timeline of this Empire of Babylon, this particular Empire of Babylon. Anyway, that being said, third one, the belly of bronze is almost certainly a testament to the Greek Empire of Alexander the Great. Does anybody know who Alexander the Great is? What's that?
I've heard of him.
We've heard of him. So Persia was the great power in the world all the way up until this Greek king called Alexander got some megalomania into his head and was very, very effective at conquering. He moved eastward and he conquered virtually all of Persia. And he was a very, very strong empire. I said, he conquered the known world. Do you know why the New Testament is written in Greek? Yes, because he conquered the known world, and what happens? You speak the language of the empire that's ruling you. And eventually Greek became the standard language of the entire Roman Empire and Greek Empire, including in Israel. It's called it was called the Hellenic period, in case you ever want to add that to your repertoire and you hear people talking about the Hellenic world. That's what they're referring to. This empire under Alexander the Great. However, this empire did not stay together for very long because Alexander dies rather suddenly on his way back from his conquest, and 4 of his generals start warring to divvy up his empire. You get the Ptolemaic Empire in Egypt, which, by the way, you know who Cleopatra is? She was one of these Ptolemaic, she was actually Greek. In that sense, ruling towards the end of the Ptolemaic Empire as Rome was rising. There was the Seleucid Empire, which concerns Israel the most. It was ruling over modern-day Syria, Babylon, and often Israel. The Seleucid Empire and the Ptolemaic Egypt were constantly pushing back and forth around Israel because that was an effective border and buffer zone. But more often than not, the Seleucids were in control. I won't go into the others too much. There's the Antigonoid kingdom that was Greece, as we think about now, and Pergamon, which is modern-day Turkey. One way of understanding this, and this will make more sense as we get to the later visions, is you notice the belly and thighs. The belly is a unified whole, but the thighs start to split off. So the belly is, you might say, Alexander, and the thighs as it starts to split. And this empire lasts for a very long time. Until we get to the legs, the kingdom of iron that breaks everything. Let's read about this. 40 down to 43.
Finally, there will be a 4th kingdom, strong in iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divine kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it. As you saw iron inbred clay, as the toes were partly iron and partly clay. So this kingdom will be strong and partly brittle. Just as you saw iron mixed with clay, so people will be a mixture and will remain united any more than iron mixes with clay.
All right. So, in the traditional interpretation, this kingdom of iron is the Roman Empire. And there's a couple of main obvious reasons that seem to make this a pretty good interpretation. Rome comes in, and you may know they utterly destroy and conquer these Greek empires. They take it all the way over, and they rule very effectively for a very long time. So just, again, like iron breaks all things that it encounters, it breaks all of this previous kingdom and utterly subdues them. And not just that kingdom, but many other kingdoms besides. Now, at first, just as a little point of Roman history, do you know who made up these very highly effective Roman legions? What kingdom did they belong to? Rome. This wasn't the truth. They were all Roman citizens who were from Italy and Rome. However, as they conquered more and more, and their forces on the one hand grew thin, and their governments needed more bureaucracy in order to manage things. Do you think that Romans, natural-born Romans, were what became people who held all of these positions of power, or made up the official members of the kingdom who had all of the rights of the kingdom?
If you chose them as the leaders, that they wouldn't have much depth to the hierarchy in different areas.
Well, and see, you would think that you would still want to promote Romans to carry out your Roman interests. As it turns out, history shows that this was one of the great reasons the Roman Empire crumbled, is they started to allow, and even allow people to earn their citizenship from the conquered peoples to fill out the ranks of the legions. They would even take whole tribes of people that they barely managed to subdue, like the Germanic tribes, and said, hey, you're strong fighters, we're kind of needing soldiers, let's pay you to fight for us. And that worked until the enemy at hand died, and then they would turn around and start fighting against Rome. And in other words, this empire no longer remains purely a Roman empire, even though it is the Roman Empire. It mixes with all kinds of people and incorporates them into not just its domain, but into its actual leadership and military, so that you might say, well, like it says, as iron and clay cannot mix, neither do, even though it has the strength of iron in its empire, nevertheless, it's more brittle because it cannot, the people there will be a mixture and will not remain united. They are no longer one empire with one purpose. They are a conglomeration of peoples who have been overcome, but now are all still only sort of committed to the peace of Rome. And this ultimately does prove to be historically Rome's undoing. All right, any questions about that?
See a resemblance of that and what's going on today.
Well, it is worth saying, I'm not saying we should do this, it's just to say with Daniel specifically, and I'm not saying we should do this with Daniel specifically, only because this at least is pretty directly confined to these four empires. And so we want to be cautious about saying it also applies to us in some sense, and we can read these prophecies as a spiral that also includes them. It is true, nevertheless, that a lot of the Old Testament prophecies has a double entendre, a double reference, so to speak, where the prophet is prophesying about something right in the immediate future or near immediate future, and that itself becomes kind of a prophetic sign about something God is going to do. One of the most famous instances, how many of you heard this verse from us, from Isaiah? Behold, virgin shall conceive and give birth to a son. You shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. Interestingly enough, Isaiah was directly talking in the most pointed sense about something that was about to happen to prove to the king of Israel that God was going to be with his people to deliver them from the king of Assyria. However, it was obviously, through the revelation of 60 years later, also a prophetic reference to a much greater fulfillment of that same promise that God gave of old. This is a common thing that happens throughout Old Testament prophecy. An immediate thing pointing towards a greater fulfillment. It may be with Daniel, and there are huge bodies of Christians, particularly of the evangelical stripe, and those tend to have what we call a millennial view of the world. We can get into millennialism. We will get into millennialism later in Daniel, so I won't belabor the point now. We tend to see Daniel as God has not completely fulfilled these prophecies yet. There are also groups of Christians who say all of the prophecies in Daniel have been fulfilled definitively, and we shouldn't look for and expect further fulfillments of them as though these are actually prophecies about today. So there's two groups of Christians on this. It's done, not to say it has no relevance, it's just to say the prophecies are fulfilled, we should look for it, and others who say, yes, it was fulfilled in that time, but there's a greater fulfillment going on. We need to use things to make sense of how long until Christ comes and all of that kind of stuff. But we'll get into that a little later in more detail. Let's move here along. So, what do you, okay, now 44 through 45. This one should be pretty clear about what it's talking about, even though Daniel doesn't say it directly.
In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of the mountain, but not by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and the interpretation is trustworthy.
All right, so here's this rock, just as a reminder, that it starts out small and where it struck the statue of the feet, and then it smashes them, and the iron, the clay, and all of it are not only smashed, but are earlier in the dream itself, they become like chaff that gets blown away by the winds. There's nothing left of it. While the rock itself becomes a huge mountain and fills the whole earth. So, if you had to take a guess, what do you suppose this rock, this kingdom represents? Right? Jesus and the kingdom that he establishes. Jesus is the rock that comes and smashes the time of those kings. And by the way, that's not to say, notice that when we say the time of those kings, it's already been said that these kings come after each other, right? So how can it be the time of those kings if some of those kings are long dead? Well, it's kind of a way of saying in this age of the kings where the powers of this world run and operate in this way. There's going to be another kingdom, one that operates very differently, that will come and overwhelm the authority and the powers and the rulers of this age. Which is how Paul, by the way, talks about Christ and about the church. It is the people who anticipate the age to come, even as they deal now with the forces of this age who are flailing against them, but will ultimately be utterly destroyed, as the book of Revelation says, so that there's nothing left of them. So that's the promise. And the people of Israel read this as a promise that a Messiah would come. And that he would, now they of course honestly thought that means the literal kingdom of Israel will arise and it will be great, and so on and so forth. But what actually happens in retrospect is that Jesus sends a king who says, my kingdom is not of this world, who rules in a very different way, establishing a transcendent kingdom that does not operate under the usual levers of politics and force and tit for tat, but just is a very, very different kind of kingdom. And he calls Christians, as he establishes this from the cross, follow in this way, to trust in him, and so have this kingdom established in their heart, and it grows until at the end of the time, the only kingdom left will be the church. The church will be the only community that exists at the end of time. America will be wiped out. Russia will be wiped out, as sure and as certainly as Roman Empire has been consigned to the ash heap of history, so will all of the nations as we now know them be consigned to the ash heap of history. Not to say that God did not use them for good purposes in their time. It's to say this kingdom is the one that will endure, and it will overcome all things. So you can see how this is immediately a promise that should give Israel hope. They should know now. Now, I mean, it doesn't say this is the Greek Empire, this is the Persian Empire, but it gives them the idea that we will endure 4 successive really hard kingdoms that are powerful. I mean, not that they're all bad, but they're powerful, they're glorious, yes, but obviously it's not going to be always amazing for us. But at the end of all of this will come this Messiah who will establish a kingdom that we can live in forever, and can put all of our hope and our confidence in. Great news if you are a Jew who is about to face exile into Babylon. Great news, even now looking back, this is how I say it even has relevance, even if you consider this to say there are no more fulfillments to be expected from Daniel. You can say, you can look back and see how God was faithful to his people Israel, and how already accomplished that rock has come and has already smashed the power and the authority of the kingdoms, so that we can live, as Zechariah puts it, to serve God without fear from our enemies, knowing that at the end, what will happen? Well, just as God has overcome the days of those kings, will overcome the days of our kings, and he will be already a part of this mountain that is growing and which will endure in time. Does that make sense? All right. Let me just, since we're almost out of time, there's not a whole lot to say about the rest of the chapter. Again, just because it's straightforward, it's not to say it's unimportant, it's to say you'll probably figure it out with a lot of interpretation about what it means. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate, that means he laid down on his face, before Daniel, and paid him honor, and ordered that an offering and incense be presented. First of all, note, I will say this. This is Nebuchadnezzar, who is just ordered that all the wise men be put to death. And he, who believes himself to have no equal, who believes he is perfectly in the right to kill all these people who cannot tell him his dream, actually humbles himself enough to bow down before Daniel. It's a tremendous thing. And he offers honor and incense and offering. In other words, he does present worship in a certain sense to Daniel. But it is fair to say that he's not necessarily worshiping Daniel as a god. Otherwise, I imagine Daniel immediately would have had words to say about that, given Daniel's already proven history that he is not about to let God not get his due. But rather, this is kind of the way they also operated in those ancient religions. You would pay worship to someone who represented the gods, as a way of paying reverence to the gods. It wasn't about the person, it was about the gods behind the person. And the person was the place you went to offer. Kind of like an idol. They didn't believe that the statue was actually the god. They believed that the statue was the embodiment of the god. So you worship the idol in order to pay honor to the god behind the idol. Does that make sense? Prophets just said, the thing behind the idol is the same as the idol itself. It's death, it's mute, it's worthless. So what's the point? But anyway, then Daniel goes on. The king said to Daniel, and this is pretty impressive, surely your God is the God of gods, and the Lord of kings, and a revealer of mystery, for you were able to reveal this mystery. Notice, as he sees what God is able to do through Daniel that no one else could do, it's not to say he's a full-blown convert to Judaism now. But he, at least in his still obvious view that there are lots of gods, what is his estimation now of Daniel's God?
Of God.
Right. He's just as I was the King of Kings. This is the God of gods. I'm not denying there are other kings. I'm just the best. I'm not denying there are other gods. He's just the best. He's able to do this. And notice he also interestingly says he's also the Lord of who? Kings. He even apparently is so overwhelmed by this that he is, at least at this moment, willing to assert that this Lord is even over me, that he is the one who sets up kings. Now this will not last long for Nebuchadnezzar. Let's just be honest. And this is also worth saying before we leave. Just because a person has what seems like a moment of conversion, where they have a big confession of faith, that does not mean that they will endure for the long. It does not even mean that they really actually know what they're saying and are committed to it. It just says they're overwhelmed at the moment with awe, with wonder, and no doubt even have something like a measure of faith, and perhaps even actual faith. But, like a parable of sower, just because the seed got planted and it started to sprout, does it always endure long? I'm just setting you up for next time when the king decides, let's make a golden image and have them worship it. Then the king placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all its wives. Sounds a little like what Pharaoh did with Joseph after Joseph interpreted his dream, right? Moreover, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego administrators over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself remained at the royal court. This, on the one hand, gives you an idea about why, after the end of their training, what did the King Nebuchadnezzar think about these four young men? They're 10 times better, you may recall, than all of the others. They'd proven by the time that they were formally done with the training that they are 10 times better because they were able to do what none of the others were able to do. And this also lays the groundwork for the next time where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are already in positions of power and respect and prestige. Thanks to Daniel. As this is why they come under scrutiny from King Nebuchadnezzar, because they're entrusted with a lot. Why aren't they going to listen to me? All right, let's close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. All right.